So the next session is about Champions Networks. I'm just going to mention some work that we did with the Champions of Accessibility Network, Gareth, Charlie, and Heather. As part of planning the day, this day of TechShare Pro, we talked about things that would be useful to the Champions of Accessibility Network. You've already heard it mentioned a couple of times. But over the last few years, the Champions of Accessibility Network, the LinkedIn group, now has 2,000 members. Charlie's one of the people who's made that happen. So this is sort of the fulcrum for the day, if you like, because now we're going to start talking about the stuff that maybe a lot of you are doing, which is trying to herd your kittens in your organization. You've heard a lot about the planning. A lot of your day-to-day work is going to be about building those networks and connecting up. So I'm really pleased to have an amazing panel here, and I'm going to leave Robin to take you away.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, guys. Okay, good. Thank you so much. Brilliant panel here today. We've got 45 minutes, which is fantastic. And we're going to be talking about Accessibility Champions Networks. We have purposefully got a variety of organizations here where their networks are coming in a number of different shapes and sizes. Some aren't even known as formally Accessibility Champions Networks, but that's on purpose because we're actually celebrating differences here, learning from the wide variety of how people do things within their organizations, and going hopefully into the realms of what turns an Accessibility Champions Network, however it's shaped, into a great Champions Network. So we'll make our way down the line, if that's all right. And if you guys could introduce yourselves, who you are, who you're from, who you're with, your role, and also the kind of shape, size, nature, however formal or otherwise, of the sort of Champions Network that you have within your organization. So who's at the far end?
At the far end? That would be me. Hi, everybody. My name is Ted Drake, and I lead accessibility at Intuit, financial software. We started our Accessibility Champion program quite a bit ago, maybe 6 years ago. And we have 2,000 current members. We have probably had hundreds more that have gone through it but have left the company. You know how that goes. We started our champion program based on a program that was started by our Pride Network. And our Pride Network wanted to make it visible that someone was a safe person to talk to. So they created a video and a course, and if you completed that course, you got a badge on your profile at work that said that you're an ally. And I wanted a way that we could recognize our accessibility stakeholders and champions, and we didn't have a way of doing that across the company. So I wanted it to be an easy barrier to enter our champions, but I also wanted to have recognition of those that were product leaders. So I reached out to Charlie immediately, and we talked about how they were doing it at BBC. And I also reached out to people in Microsoft and Google to just kind of figure it out. In the back of the room was Sagar Barpaya. He worked with me, and together the two of us sort of wrote it out on a napkin. And then 2 weeks later, we were in India and we launched it. And it's been really successful. Now, I will say, if anybody wants to see what we do or want to start your own champion, you can search for Intuit Accessibility Champion on your favorite search engine, and you will find a document that has everything that we do. It's laid out with all the resources, the way that we do our 3 levels. That way anybody can kind of take that and use it towards their own.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Hi everyone. My name is James Jacobs. I'm the head of accessibility at Jadu. In case you're not familiar with Jadu, we're a software company, best known for our platform, the Jadu platform, which is a low-code self-service platform used to kind of build out digital services. It's used by hundreds of local governments and other organisations throughout the world, and we are super passionate about accessibility. We're very much trying to create a culture of accessibility and embed it into everything that we do. Our Champions Network plays a big part in that. We're quite a small team, just under 100 of us worldwide. We're remote and distributed. And champions-wise, our network's fairly informal, I would say. It's quite new. It's a little under a year old. Round about 20 to 25 people at the moment, so kind of 20 to 25% of the organisation. But yeah, it's still early days for us. See the importance, already seen the value of it. with some great measurable results. But interested in learning from the others on the panel about how they've grown and maintained their network. So yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, so I'm Charlie Turrell. I'm one of the co-founders of CAN, but I work for the Ministry of Justice. I'm the accessibility engagement lead there. Our Champions Network, even though we've been kind of going about a year and a half, I'd still say that we're fairly new, really. We're still kind of figuring out the way that we work what works for us. We are not just in the digital space, but pretty much across the entirety of the MOJ. So that's about 90,000 people, which is quite a lot of people to try and get involved. But we're about 100 now. I'd say half digital, half maybe non-digital, which I think is a really great mix. We did the same at the BBC, and I think the fact that we are in all those spaces means that everybody gets to learn from each other, that we're all doing something digital, whether that is creating websites or apps, or whether it is just creating presentations, documents, training. So it's really nice that we have that network where everyone can learn from each other. I think we are reasonably informal. There is a learning journey that people can get involved with, but it's up to them how kind of in-depth they want their journey to be. But I really do focus on that networking element rather than just capability building. I think everyone wants to learn, everyone wants to get involved in accessibility, but I think being able to share with each other and being able to support each other is the way that you change culture in an organisation. I think otherwise you end up just learning in silos, and that information will go if people start to leave or move teams. And so that is where I try and push it the most, really. And I think that is a way to kind of have that culture change, but also get senior leadership involved, and anyone can join, really. And so, yeah, we're still new. But we are focusing on those kind of events and people coming and speaking, and we're crafting it all ourselves. And I think it's really nice that everyone gets to say in what that network looks like.
Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mimuna, or Mim. I work for the Stepstone group, which you may know in the UK, for example, with Total Jobs. So we are a group of many job boards across the world. 4,000 of us, a lot of product and tech colleagues for me to deal with as I'm looking after how inclusive our product can be and how inclusive our technology should be. So accessibility has been a part of the conversations for us for the last 2 years. And only the last 2 years, I should say. So it's something we started from zero and trying to build as we go and sustain over time. So that's my day job, but I'm also here today to represent our employee resource group, which unhelpfully is called Champions of Accessibility Network. But I've got in this group, which I'm very, very proud to chair, over 150 colleagues based everywhere across our organization. So in Poland, in Belgium, in the UK, in Canada, and many more locations. And what we do with the group is really try and put accessibility on the agenda for the business, be it about how we operate as an employer ourselves, making sure the environment is safe and welcoming for everyone, but also looking at things such as our processes, procurement, and ultimately how we also change the way we work and what we deliver to our customers, to candidates we are trying to match to jobs and employers, and making sure that our vision and our mission of the right job for everyone is actually coming to life as such, where everyone really means everyone, and including obviously people who are disabled or neurodivergent as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we've already had quite a few kind of insights and tips, some practical tips as well, as to kind of how these different networks are impacting your organization. So with regards, maybe just if you think of one thing that having a network within your organization can do to really accelerate the pace of change when it comes to accessibility and inclusion, prioritizing, digital accessibility in everything that you do, shifting left. Can you give us an insight? And I'm certainly not going to go down the line and expect everyone each time to answer. So just indicate that you want to respond, and you can fight amongst yourselves. So
I'll jump in because my answer on this one is going to be very short. I've already hinted at that just before. For us at the Stepstone Group, accessibility was not something we talked about at all. Up until a couple of years ago, we actually worked with AbilityNet on putting together a maturity model. And we literally started from there. Accessibility even what does it mean didn't exist. So our way to try and put that on the agenda, because it was something we needed to turn into a priority for us, for the product and tech teams, was to build an employee resource group, because we had other employee resource groups looking at other diversity dimensions. And why not disability at the same time? Why would we talk about other topics of inclusion and not this one? So for us, having that set up to try and push the accessibility agenda was important. That was probably the only way forward for us at that time. Probably still is something that is one of the only ways compared to, I'm sure, what we'll hear from you just after. But being able to be in the organization and not feel ashamed or shy to talk about disability inclusion, to talk about neurodiversity, and to say this is everyone's job was really the first step forward for us. And being sure that we can talk about that in an organization and talk about it with a level of confidence, I would say, is the very first step for us. That has been for the last 2 years at least.
Yeah, I think it's really similar for any organisation that I've spoken to around Champions Networks, and especially for us. I think getting the language right is really important. I think when I first started to speaking to stakeholders, senior leadership internally, I felt like we were having two different conversations when I started to talk about digital accessibility. And halfway through, I think one of them I'd stopped and I said, "Oh, what is it that you think that I mean when I'm talking about this?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, so with disabled people, like people in wheelchairs." And then that was it. And I was like, okay, so we need to go back and have a bigger conversation about what I mean when I talk about digital accessibility. And once we'd had that conversation, the enthusiasm completely changed. We're like, oh yeah, I didn't realize like my link text might be not right on my email, or actually the way that I approach this person isn't right. And I didn't really talk to my team about how they like to learn or how they want to interact with me, what barriers they might be experiencing. And I thought, this is great. This is the bit, this is a passion. This is this is what I like to talk about. And so once we realized that, we did a kind of little presentation, just what is digital accessibility, and broke it down really simply and started to speak to people about it. And then the questions were coming out and the people thinking, oh, okay, well, how do I make that practical in my work? And I think that language meant that we all had this universal kind of almost like social currency and we could start building these things together. And then I started to get bits of information from them and think, oh, actually, maybe this team over there needs a bit of help with that, or actually we can feed that into our training. And so it just made that so much easier to have that conversation. And then that's where the culture change comes from, because the more people understand it, the more excited they are to speak about it. Then they're bringing it back to their teams, and their teams are interested and they want to join the network. And before you know it, the Champions Network's almost building itself. Yeah. And it's really great. And then you can start building on that foundation and say, okay, so let's talk about intersectionality. Like somebody over here talk about trauma-informed design. Like, how does that fit into the inclusive design work? And it's fun. That's the bit that I think everybody wants to have that conversation with. And I think if you're making it fun, you're making it interesting, it's so much more sustainable than just thinking, okay, it's compliance, or we just need to do this, or we need to tick these boxes. So I think for me, language is absolutely massive.
Yeah, completely agree. It's hard to just narrow it down to one thing. So I'm going to be cheeky and mention two. Yeah, obviously we're quite a small team. We're quite heavy already on training and how accessibility is kind of integrated to the whole team. For example, everyone at Jadu has objectives that are directly kind of feeding back into accessibility. We already have things like new starter training and role-specific training. But what the Champions Network kind of allows us to do is to add an extra layer on top of that. So the way that we do it, we don't really have the kind of structured learning path yet. It's definitely something that we're looking at. But we have we started monthly. It got too much. We've got bi-monthly meetups at the moment. The 2-hour sessions where the first hour is kind of on a voted for topic. So the attendees, the champions, can vote on the topic that they want covering, and we've found really great success with that. So it's for us, it's kind of about adding that extra layer of knowledge in a more of a kind of a fireside chat way. So without the kind of formal training which we already have. And we've seen some great success with that. It kind of breeds peer support. People are working together. people are proactively talking about accessibility day to day. And yes, we've got we're a software company, so we've got designers, developers, testers, involved in that network. But we've also got like project managers, product owners. We've got the odd VP that dips in, and all these people are kind of taking it back to their daily roles. And it gets accessibility, as we know, that extra seat at the table. Because having an internal accessibility team is great, but you can't be everywhere at once. You can't be in all the meetings, although you might try. You can't be in all the client meetings and the internal meetings, the kick-off meetings and everything. So I think it's really powerful for just, obviously building advocates, but having that extra seat at the table, going forward.
Yeah, this morning there was a mention, I think it was Susanna said, we don't have a lack of experts. We have a lack of common knowledge that's keeping us from progressing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's key for us because, let's face it, most of us have a very small team. Less than 10 people, less than 5 people. A lot of you, it's just one person in your company. Your objectives and your priorities are so narrow that there's no way that you could do everything. Mm. And our champions have driven so much change at Intuit, from setting up our neurodiversity network to establishing a out of spoons protocol. We run a weekly lunch and learn. Yesterday, the session was about equine sensory therapy, basically a farm that uses horses to help children with autism. That was run by one of our champions. It's just, I'm always amazed at what comes up through our champions. From the very, first week that they're a champion, our level 1s to level 2s and level 3s, being able to run bug bashes, and they create tools and resources. One of our champions even introduced a new JIRA ticket issue called usability, and she had this whole process of how you define when the bug is actually caused by design and not by engineering. She set up the time, the SLAs, and everything. These are things that a 5-member accessibility team could never do. Mm. But when you have an army of people, we have about 10% of our company are champions, and they're in a Slack channel. We have 1,800 people in a Slack channel that get daily information and feedback. And we have an Ask Accessibility channel that gets answers within like 30 minutes, usually by our champions. That's the benefit for me, is that I'm no longer doing these simple questions like what is alt text. It gives us the ability to start answering more interesting questions like intersectionality, trauma-informed design, focus management, complex use of ARIA. These are the things that the central team should be focusing on. And that's why I can never estimate how much value our champions have had. Mm.
Brilliant, thanks. I just thought, what do you guys call them, champions in all cases? Because some organizations call them ninjas.
Oh, no.
Could be an accessibility warrior. Are they all champions?
I actually have something on that because I was talking to a company that wanted to create like a accessibility champion training program and such, and they wanted to call them champions. But I told them that the way that they were doing this training to call them champions wasn't really relevant for most companies that have a champion program. And we also have a program, I can't remember the name, it's based on Star Wars. I'm not a Star Wars geek. But it's a way that if you want to become like a engineering Yoda.
Jedi.
Yeah, Jedi program, that's it. I didn't want to go with the Jedi program for our champions. I didn't want to change the name because we have name value. But champions to me means I'm someone that I may not know everything about accessibility, but I'm ready to stand up and say, I want to make a difference.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree, because I think sometimes the pressure for champions, like you introduce them to a world that they might not have experienced before. It's a whole load of new information. It can feel really overwhelming. And if I'm naming it anything other than champion, there's almost an expectation there that they're going to have to be experts, Whereas when I say when you join in, the thing that I want from you is to champion accessibility. Like, you don't have to be an expert. You just need to know where to find the answer. And if you do know the answer, that's great. We're all trying to learn together. We're all trying to find out new ways of working all of the time. I was like, but I want you to champion what it is that we're doing. I want you to tell people. I want you to at least go, okay, yeah, I don't know it, but I can go and ask the team, or there's a SharePoint site, or there's a thing on LinkedIn. I was just something. I was like, so almost, I think it takes the pressure off slightly, because anyone can talk about it, and that's fine. Like, you don't have to have a level of knowledge. You just have to have that kind of enthusiasm for it.
You could start off as a Padawan and make your way up. I mean, we've covered probably some of this in your previous responses, but when you are considering that multiple things you want to change or improve when it comes to accessibility and inclusion within your organizations, how can you get the most? How can you get a champions network to kind of maximize the value? How can you maximize the value of your champions network so that it can be a real force for change?
I think for me, getting senior leadership involved is a great way of doing it. I think that's a blocker in a lot of ways. There are blockers. You can have champions that are really eager and that are learning, and then they want to go and take it back to their team, and maybe senior leadership just doesn't quite understand what it is that they're trying to do, and it gets de-scoped again. And so the champion knows exactly what good looks like and still can't implement the good. I was like, so actually sharing it and getting senior leadership should be involved, even if it just means that they're shouting about the events that we're doing. We did a series of events in September, and it was sort of like a mini conference. It was on every Tuesday, and we had 4 speakers, many people that are in the audience that came and spoke. That was just really helpful. And senior leadership can't always make those sessions, but they were talking about it to everybody. It was everywhere. It was on Slack. It was being brought up in team meetings. It was being brought up in all hands meetings. I was like, and that was just really helpful. So I think including people in that journey and saying to them, okay, yeah, you might not necessarily work on these products, but it's just really helpful that if they're doing it, the champion will go, okay, yeah, so this is just a common thing we do. This is what, this is something that I'm not going to get blocked for. So I find that really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd agree with everything you've said there, actually. I'm trying to think what I can add to that. I mean, the leadership buy-in, obviously, we all know. We've been really looking at Jadu because our CEO, Suraj, has always been really passionate about accessibility and always wanted to push it forward. So we've never really had to have that battle, but I appreciate that, a lot of people do. But I think, just the obvious as well, numbers are great, a spread of roles. They don't necessarily have to. I think you hit it on the head there when you said that champions don't necessarily have to know anything about accessibility. They just want to be able to champion it, and I think that's really powerful because you can kind of learn as you go. You don't have to be an expert. It's more about that open discussion, making sure accessibility is considered. Let's be honest. The more we talk about it, the better, really. So yeah, I'd say encouraging open discussion. We've got dedicated Slack channels. We shout about upcoming meet updates on various channels, company newsletters. We record the sessions, we share the sessions. So just raising awareness, getting people interested in accessibility. Because I don't know about everyone else, but I think it's pretty cool, accessibility. My background is as a developer, so I really like the technical aspect. But also, there's so many interesting aspects in accessibility. It's not all about code. It's not all about ARIA. It's not all about keyboard. There's so many different angles, and I just think it's really interesting. So yeah, just raising awareness and trying to kind of increase passion levels, I guess. Yeah.
Earlier today, I think it was Matthew said that you need to establish baselines and metrics and stuff. And one of the things that made it successful for us is from the very beginning, like person number one, we had a database. It was easy to sign up, but that database allowed me to start pulling in numbers and having competitions. I'd say, hey, Toronto, you're almost going to get beaten by Bangalore, like how many? And so we would see these spikes as they would compete to see who had the most champions. One of the things that also helped for me was after about 4 years, I downloaded the list of employees from our champions and I sent it to HR. And I asked them, can you give me some anonymous reports back? I want to know, how do these champions compare to the general population when it comes to things like not leaving the company? Things that are valuable to the company. Do they tend to stay longer? Do they tend to get promotions more? I wanted this kind of information so I could go back. Some of the things I learned was, yes, they did tend to leave the company less often than the general. Some of the other things I found was that we were not very diverse. And so that led us to reach out much more to our different ERGs to make sure that we were getting more voices. And our weekly lunch and learns, we started including more voices from our different ERGs. And so I do think that it's really valuable to have, oh, and there was one thing. Our higher level accessibility champions were more likely to be regrettable losses, meaning they got headhunted. That was one of the things we learned. But there's nothing you can do about that because you're basically building people's skills and confidence, and that's going to make it so that their targets, like Sauter in the back, he was a regrettable loss.
To elaborate a little bit on that from the more informal perspective that I've experienced and I've seen, I think I completely agree the senior leadership is really important to get the buy-in from. And we are very lucky with our employee resource group. Our executive sponsor is actually our CFO, which can be quite handy when it comes to getting budget. We've not had to cross that bridge just yet, so I'm keeping that in the back pocket. But is quite vocal in some places that I wouldn't have access to or anyone else in the organization wouldn't have access to. But I also want to say we should also not discount the influence that some of the middle management can have also in enabling their teams or some of the champions to actually do the work. And I think of one of my colleagues, hopefully who's watching online, Iñaki, who's been part of the Champions Network for a while, was really passionate about accessibility, knew a couple of people in his team who would want to also push that forward. And he did his best to get things moving, working on our design system and making it as compliant as possible and trying to get the developers and everyone around that ecosystem to think about it as well. And without his manager trying to enable that as well or not telling him off because he was spending a little bit of time working on those tickets and all of that, we could make progress and we could build that good story as well. So I think balancing out those elements of what is really needed and what's going to be critical to sustain it, but also how do we bake that into different teams and build good stories out of that is super important as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So Ted mentioned ERGs. For anyone who doesn't know, employee resource groups. Some organisations call them SIGs, special interest groups. These are groups that have an interest in common. Could be disability, could be LGBT, etc. And let's talk about those. So they can be really powerful, can't they, in kind of building advocacy when it comes to inclusion within your organisation in general, and obviously in those specific areas. So, you know, a disability SIG or ERG. How could you manage the connections between that and, say, the Accessibility Champions Network within your organisation, or is there an overlap? Is it the same thing? So
I can start with that and set some basic knowledge on that. I co-founded our Abilities Network. I also helped co-found our Senior Network and our Indigenous Peoples Network, and I've been a member of multiple other networks. The Employee Resource Group is like the advocate for the employee. And they tend to be groups that include people that are represented by the group. So, for instance, the Abilities Network tends to be members that have disabilities or their family members have disabilities, or they might be allies, but the majority are going to be people with disabilities. So part of being in an ERG group is that if you have a problem or if you have a concern, the ERG group is going to be your advocate. They're the ones that can work with upper management, CEO, staff, things like that to say, this is a policy that we need to change. The champions are champions for accessibility, their colleagues, the customers. A lot of our champions and a lot of our ERG groups, they're the same. A lot of our champions are members of different ERG groups. So they have a different purpose, but they work together quite well.
Yeah, I like that point because I think I was always quite skeptical of kind of interacting with ERGs, mainly because I think those ERGs are a safe space for the people that are in there, and so it's not a free research space. And so I'm very careful, especially when, even internally, because MOJ is heavy security, essentially. So getting research can be really difficult, and sometimes you can maybe lean over to those groups and be like, oh, actually, you know, can you have a little look at this? And I just don't think, for me, that is the right space for that. But I do think that you can both be advocates for each other's groups. And so I met up with lots of different ones. There's a neurodiversity one, there's various kind of small ones depending on what department that you're in, etc. And I just said, what is it that you would need from me? And I thought about what I would need from them. And I was like, actually just shout about the events that we're doing, tell people that the network is here, champion what it is that we're doing. And I was like, and then I will tell people that your network exists. I think when you're in such a large organization, I'm still finding teams that I didn't know existed. And I've been there for 2 years now, and then the other ones will pop up, and there's other mini champions groups that I didn't know that was there. And so that flow of information can be really difficult in an organization like that. So I was like, actually, talk to people about what it is that we're doing, send people over to our team. Some people didn't even know there was an accessibility team at the MOJ, and with the services that we offer consultancy, we offer training, we offer just one-on-one support. So I was like, well, tell people that. Like, I'll give you all the links to spaces, like shout about it in newsletters. And then when I come across people, or I'm doing my champion sessions or do one-to-ones, I will mention your networks and I will send them your way. So I said that flow of information was really helpful. But I was very careful at the beginning about what kind of, you just don't want to put undue pressure on people to be able to give you information.
I think I completely relate with what you said, Charlie. I think there's something that's very important as well, is that to make sure that those employee resource groups are not also stigmatized, because they need that safe space as a reflection of a society that is not very inclusive, generally speaking, and probably the workplace where they are in may not be that inclusive just yet. And I know that when we started, there was this very weird assumption, which is not going to surprise any of you, I'm sure, that we don't have any disabled employees. No, you do have them. You just don't know they're there, but they exist. So just being able to build that psychological safety for everyone, but also the way we set it up was really as that champion element. It's not just for disabled employees to come together and fear being stigmatized, but everyone being there championing each other. And then within that, we create those nearly individual safe spaces for different groups if they want to. But I think where there's huge value as well in having those ERGs is to keep the business in check and accountable for driving policies, for making the work environment safer, and reflect on what it is that we do as a business and the impact we can have on the working environment, but more widely the society that we are actually engaging with daily, the customers we are engaging with daily, and where our values fit within all of that. So I think in terms of building that accountability and getting people, members of that community, to come back to, for example, me in my day job and what I do with the product and tech teams, and say, hey, we've just released this thing. Why is it in such a state when color contrast could be better? Or actually, I'm colorblind and this is not great. And I think having that dialogue between the two entities, whether it's the product and tech organization, me in my role, or the ERG itself, and having that interaction is also what's helping us be more consistent and have that continuous culture in the business, because people who are really so truly passionate about it, at some point they will just want to live to do more or better. And if we don't build that infrastructure around it, it's not going to last, unfortunately.
How many employees did you say Stepstone had? 4,000?
4,000.
And they didn't know if they had any disabled employees?
No.
Okay. I think it's 85%. I mean, I hope they have lots that are obviously disabled, but 70 or 80% of disabilities are invisible. So yeah, they've got some.
Oh, yes.
Any organisations who are concerned about overusing their internal resources when it comes to user testing, etc.? AbilityNet offer diverse user testers, just saying.
And it's good. I tried it.
Brilliant. So there might be people in the audience who, within their organisations, are feeling disempowered, perhaps thinking that some of the tips and strategies that we've been talking about today won't work in their organisation. What can you say to help them feel more confident in kind of pushing harder for implementing, setting up a champion network or growing an existing champions network?
I think everybody starts somewhere, and you might be on your own for a little bit, and that's not great, but that's why, one of the reasons why we set up Can. There are so many people that are in the exact same position. Even with the BBC, that started 20 years ago, but it was just Gareth just asking people and wanting to talk about accessibility, and then eventually that grew to almost 350 people, and that was great, but that took a considerable amount of time. I was like, and you aren't alone. We're an entire room of people that are really passionate about this, that have taken their time out to be here. I was like, but Can is a space that anyone can join, and just reach out to somebody. Like, we are a massive network, but there's always going to be somebody that is also in your similar space or was and has a great strategy about how to manage that. I think I know we're talking about burnout this afternoon, and we did a session of that in Cannes a couple of weeks ago. And burnout's real because sometimes you feel like you're the only one doing it and you're saying the same thing over and over again, and it's a bit of an echo chamber. Whereas, you know, the best way of avoiding that is to have those conversations with other people, and Cannes is a space where that can happen. So, you know, don't do it on your own. There's always going to be someone that will help you. There's always a resource that will help you as well. And it might not even be about how to do it. It's sometimes just how you feel while you're doing it. It might be that you need to have a discussion. I do that to Heather all the time. I constantly message her and be like, right, I need to rant about something, or I've got an idea. Do you think this even works? And it's nice to have that. And I don't think I would feel as empowered or as excited if I didn't have people in the community that I could speak to.
I can't double down on what you just said. Start somewhere.
Yeah.
Like what Intuit has, what you even have at the MOG, I can't imagine having that anytime soon. But I can rely on 100 plus people who are really caring and passionate about those things. And in their roles, they can go back to their teams. They can try something on their own and do something. One of the wildest things that has happened for me recently in my day job is the investors relations team getting in touch with me to try and make our investors reports more accessible. That's not my direct area of influence, but they know about what we're trying to achieve. And then they come and then they bring the teams together to try and achieve something better. So there's always going to be an opportunity lying somewhere. And I'm going to probably shock a few of you by saying that, but the best influencer you may have to try and unlock that potential may be just you. You may not need that C-suite level person to push the agenda. You very likely are someone in your organization that people look up to, that people have respect for, that people want to follow and feel that they have the same enablement as you do in trying to build something more accessible. So if you have opportunities to speak in internal conferences, town halls, any sort of company updates, if there's any event that you can take part in, like a hackathon or something like that, and be that voice, be that amplifier for a few minutes, for an hour, for however long that is, but having that consistent message that this matters to you, this matters to many more in the business, this is something we need to achieve together, that will also help you go a long way. It doesn't necessarily need that very fixed infrastructure, processes, capabilities, and so on. As long as we start talking about it and we keep talking about it, then the progress can really happen. So think about your own personal influence within your organization or even externally, and how you can continue amplifying that message across, because that will unlock a lot of opportunities, because people will then want to join up and join forces, really.
Yeah, I think totally agree with everything that you've said there. I think I'd just add that, you know, if you are facing barriers and maybe getting disheartened, keep going. Know that it works. You know, we've seen some real measurable progress by having champions, and you know they reported that back to us. Over a variety of different roles. You know, I was speaking to a project manager the other day who said she was actually thanking us for the last champion session, and she was saying how much more confident she feels in speaking to our customers about accessibility following the sessions and the kind of internal chat. And we've kind of seen that across the different teams, really, in our support team, even our kind of sales and solution team. You know, the better equipped to how to demo accessibility features of our software and kind of raise awareness. So yeah, you know you're fighting the good fight, as cheesy as it sounds, and you know, keep going. Yeah.
Robin, I don't have anything else to add because they've said it really well. I know you have other questions.
Yeah. We've got about 5 minutes. So I'm aware that we've probably covered a lot of this already, but my next question is about keeping things fresh, keeping them evolving. You know, how do you keep things exciting for your champions so that they're feeling, you know, the passion levels stay high, they stay engaged, that accessibility hub resources get refreshed a lot and updated, and you know everyone's kind of active within the network. And have you got any examples of things you've had to change that maybe weren't working and you had to revisit? So yeah. Final kind of thoughts on this one. But you know, if you've given us the fantastic tips already, a lot of you have, all of you have, then please feel free not to have to come up with something else?
I think make it fun for you as well as everybody else. I think, I love accessibility. I find it really passionate, and I'll speak to anybody about it all of the time. But I think if you're enjoying it, pick topics that you really enjoy. It's not all about kind of just learning constantly about maybe the code or anything else like that. Maybe that is what you're passionate about and you enjoy that as well. But ask your champions. I mean, in my one-to-ones, it's half an hour, and I was like, tell me about yourself. Like, how do you like to learn? Why are you interested in this? Like, is there anything in your team where you think, maybe we could do a little bit of help with that? And then I just talk about what I like. I was like, I'm really interested in neurodiversity. This trauma-informed design stuff is fascinating. I've never kind of heard about that before. And so I think that passion is almost infectious. And I think just constantly have those check-ins and just ask people what it is that they want to see. Is there any people that they've seen at a convention and you think, could we maybe get them in, or maybe do a watch party? And try different things. Like, we do panels, we have workshops, we have watch parties, we'll do a talk with the Q&A. We did, I think Danny Payne came in from Skipton, and he did a really fascinating session about just almost like a story about what he experienced, and he built a kind of website with barriers in it for people to then go and use and simulate kind of the frustrations he might experience because he only had a little bit of time. And I was like, it's just a really interesting way of doing something. And I think those conversations he's had all the time, just keep it fresh. I think especially with your champions, you might have spoken to them and had that initial one-to-one. Have another check-in 6 months later, a year later, just because they change and what they're interested in has changed as well. I think we changed at the BBC so many times in the way that we ran that network, and it was just to keep it fresh. And maybe even to get certain kinds of people in the network. We had tons of designers, but maybe not a lot of developers. And I was like, right, okay, let's go and figure out why that is. Let's go and talk to developers. Is this something that you're not seeing? Are you not being represented in any way? But having those constant open conversations and being willing to change, I think, is really important as well.
I would also add, since we've been around for a while also, we've run net promoter scores to kind of track to see if champions are satisfied. We have an annual meeting with our level 2s and level 3s to plan for the following year. We started as an experiment. It was, we got together and we said, let's try an experiment, see if we can get 50 people to join. That experiment seemed to be successful. We treat it as an experiment. We are constantly evolving our champion network, whether it's changing what people have to do to become a champion or adding new tasks, coming up with new things like our Lunch and Learn was an experiment. I think that's part of the key. Is if you set up a champion network, don't think that you're done. You set up like an experiment, and then that experiment's going to change as your team changes, as your company changes.
I think, all of that is spot on. There's also an element, I would say, in terms of keeping it fresh in finding what really makes people tick. For some people, it will be neurodiversity. That's something that will hit home very easily for some people. For others, it will be because they will actually consider the experiences of their friends, their family. Accidents happen. So find that element, have those conversations with people that can make them think about, okay, this I'm more familiar with, I understand it better. How can I best do my job so that if someone is in this situation, my product, my technology doesn't come in the way of them doing whatever job they have to do on my platform, on my website, with my product, and so on. So I think finding those elements is really important. And I think we've talked about that yesterday around intersectionality. And thinking about that is really, truly important because, obviously my industry is the job market. So when it comes to discrimination, there's a lot I can think about. But if we look at those programs completely in isolation, we'll end up with solutions that actually don't fit different parts of the population. And there's no one size fits all for sure, but accessibility ultimately is about that universal design piece and those curb cuts and making sure that what you build really works for everyone. So looking into those areas is so very important and should not be discarded as well. And I can't remember if it was exactly the term that he used, but the president of the Paralympic Committee in the summer talked about the inclusion revolution. And I'm French, so I'm all for revolutions. So I think we're all here for that as well. And the more we can push for that and making sure that in a few years our jobs don't even exist anymore, that's all I can wish for. And I'm very confident that we're getting there with the strides we're taking now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You mentioned about the challenges in recruitment and absolutely second that. Maybe next year at TSP we can do a whole day on diversity in recruitment. Maybe that's the industry we should tackle next time. So thank you so much. You guys are champions on this panel. Brilliant. Thank you.